This is What's the Deal, the economics show that breaks down what's really happening with your money and your career. Anyone who's gone grocery shopping in the last couple of years already knows the feeling. A coffee that used to be $3 is now $5. A simple restaurant meal runs $30 instead of $20. Rent keeps climbing. Gas prices jump around with no warning. In the United States, the cost of living has been the #1 concern for years running, the issue people name above almost everything else. And this isn't just an American story. It's global. People all over the world are feeling the exact same squeeze. Here's what makes it so confusing, though. The official inflation numbers have actually calmed down a lot. Inflation peaked at over 9% back in 2022, the worst in 4 decades. By early 2026 it was hovering somewhere around 2.5%. So if inflation has cooled this much, why does everything still feel impossibly expensive? That's the real puzzle. And the answer changes how you think about your own money. If the cost of living is weighing on you, hit subscribe and check back tomorrow. New breakdown every day. Start with something a lot of people get wrong, because clearing it up explains almost everything. Inflation and the cost of living are not the same thing. People use the words interchangeably, but they measure different things, and confusing them is exactly why this feels so baffling. Inflation measures how fast prices are rising right now, this year compared to last year. The cost of living measures how much money it actually takes to live a decent life, in total. Those two can move in completely different directions, and that's precisely what's been happening. Here's a simple way to see it. Imagine a coffee cost $1 back in 2019. By 2022 it crept up to about $1.20. That's roughly 2% a year, totally normal, barely noticeable. But now that same coffee is $2. This year's inflation might only be 3%, meaning the price is barely moving anymore. Yet the coffee still costs double what it did in 2019. The big jump already happened. It's baked in permanently. Slower inflation does not undo it. It just means the price stops climbing as fast from that new, higher level. That's the trap millions of people are stuck in, and it's worth saying clearly because it's the heart of the whole confusion. From 2019 to 2024, overall prices rose by more than a quarter. A massive jump in a short time. Then inflation slowed down. So people hear, inflation is getting better, on the news and feel genuinely confused, even gaslit, because nothing in their actual life got cheaper. Prices are just climbing more slowly from a much higher starting point. Getting better, in inflation terms, doesn't mean prices fall. It only means they rise less quickly. Now for the numbers that really matter. By 2024, a typical American family of 4 needed somewhere around $120,000 a year just to afford a basic but secure life. Housing, food, childcare, transportation, the essentials, nothing fancy. Back in 2019, that same family needed closer to $93,000. That's nearly $30,000 more, in just 5 years, simply to stand in the same place. And here's the part that genuinely stings. Wages didn't keep up. Around 60% of American workers have said their income failed to keep pace with rising prices. Even people who got raises often found the raise wasn't enough to cover how much more expensive life had become. So the feeling of falling behind isn't imaginary, and it isn't a personal failing. Prices genuinely outran paychecks for years. There's an even sharper way to see this. One careful study found that for the median earner, real buying power has actually fallen since 2001 when you measure it against the true cost of the things families really need. Meanwhile, the official statistics suggest buying power went up over the same period. Two respected measures, looking at the same economy, reaching opposite conclusions about whether life got more or less affordable. That gap between the official story and the lived experience is a huge part of why people feel something is off. So which things actually got expensive? Because it was not evenly spread, and the details matter. Housing is the biggest culprit by far. Home and rent costs jumped sharply, rising more than 30% between 2019 and 2024. The average American now spends about a third of their income just on housing. In expensive cities, that climbs much higher. Take a real example. In one large state, average rent went from around $1,200 a month in 2015 to over $2,200 by 2025, an 85% increase over the decade. The same state went from the 14th most expensive rental market in the country to the 6th, in just 10 years. That's not a statistic. That's families being priced out of where they grew up. And it's not only rent. In that same state, average home insurance premiums hit nearly $2,800 a year, up more than 60% in just 5 years. Combined with rising property taxes, the yearly cost of simply owning a home, before the mortgage itself, can top $10,000. Nearly 90% of residents surveyed there said they were worried about inflation, and about half said they were considering leaving the state entirely because of costs. People are literally relocating to escape the price of staying put. This is the single biggest squeeze on family budgets. When housing eats a third or even half of your income, it almost doesn't matter that a coffee is only a little pricier. The big money is already gone before you buy anything else. Childcare is the second crusher. Costs there have climbed relentlessly. In some places, childcare now runs more than $40 an hour. A decent daycare or preschool can cost $2,000 a month or more. Stop and think about that. Some parents now pay more for childcare than they ever paid for college, or more than their rent. For a family with 2 young kids, childcare can quietly become the single largest line in the budget, larger even than housing. Food is next, and this is where people feel the squeeze most often, because they buy groceries every week. Here are some concrete numbers. One congressional analysis found that the typical American family paid about $310 more for groceries in 2025 than in 2024, looking at the same basket of common items. Of 31 everyday products, 20 rose in price. The biggest single jumps were ground coffee, up about $76 over the year, and ground beef, up about $71. That coffee spike was tied largely to a steep tariff on a major coffee-growing country. The beef increase came partly from cattle herds shrinking to record lows. Eggs became the poster child for inflation after bird flu outbreaks repeatedly wiped out millions of hens and sent prices lurching up and down. Over a longer view, the numbers are even starker. In one state, eggs have surged 135% over the past decade. Rice up 46%. Bread up 30%. These are staples, the cheapest foods people fall back on when money is tight, and they've climbed the most in percentage terms. But here's the nuance worth holding on to. Some things stayed manageable. Cooking simple meals at home with basic ingredients rose far less than eating out, which has climbed close to 4% a year. Plain dairy and produce have stayed relatively flat at times. So the squeeze depends heavily on how a person eats. Lots of restaurants, meat, and specialty coffee means real pain. Simple home cooking with basic ingredients softens the blow considerably. That's not a complete solution, but it's a real lever, and it's one of the few that's actually in a person's control. Energy and utilities have bounced around too, pushed up partly by tariffs and global tension, and partly by simple things like local utility rate hikes that quietly add up on the monthly bill. In some regions, electricity rates have jumped 5% or more in a single year, and one of the quieter drivers behind that is actually the AI boom from earlier episodes. All those new data centers consume staggering amounts of electricity, and in some areas that surging demand is pushing up power prices for ordinary households who never asked for it. It's a strange, hidden connection. The technology reshaping the job market is also nudging up the electric bill. Then there are 2 categories that deserve their own moment, because they hammer families quietly and relentlessly: healthcare and education. Healthcare is one of the most insidious costs, because so much of it is hidden until you suddenly need it. Insurance premiums creep up every year. Out-of-pocket costs, the deductibles and co-pays, climb steadily. In many places, a single person now spends hundreds of dollars a month on health insurance before they've seen a single doctor, and a family pays far more. And unlike groceries, where you can switch to cheaper options, healthcare offers very little room to shop around when you're sick or scared. The price is whatever it is, and you pay it. This is a huge, often invisible drag on household budgets, and it tends to hit hardest exactly when people are least able to deal with it, during an illness or an emergency. Education is the other long-term crusher, especially for families with children heading toward college. The cost of a degree has climbed far faster than general inflation for decades. Many young people now start their adult lives carrying tens of thousands of dollars in debt before they've earned a single paycheck. That debt then shapes everything that follows. It delays buying a home, delays starting a family, delays saving for the future. So the high cost of education doesn't just hit students. It ripples forward for years, dragging down the financial life of an entire generation. We'll dig deeper into whether college is even worth it in a future episode, but for now, just note that education is one of the heaviest weights on the modern budget. So why did all of this happen? There are really four main forces, and it's worth understanding each one, because they explain not just the past but what's likely coming. The first was the pandemic breaking supply chains. During COVID, factories shut down. Ships stopped moving. Ports clogged up with containers that couldn't be unloaded. When the supply of goods gets choked off while people still want to buy, prices climb, because there simply isn't enough stuff to go around. Fixing those tangled global systems took years, and a few corners of the economy still haven't fully recovered. The second was an energy shock. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, energy prices went haywire across the world. Oil spiked. Natural gas spiked. Electricity followed. And here's the thing people miss about energy. It's buried inside the price of absolutely everything, because it takes energy to manufacture a product, energy to ship it across the world, energy to store it, and energy to sell it in a lit, heated store. When energy gets expensive, the whole economy gets more expensive, all at once, with a delay. The third was government spending. This one's more debated, but the basic economics is widely accepted. Governments around the world spent enormous sums during the pandemic to keep economies from collapsing, trillions of dollars in the US alone. That was arguably necessary at the time. But when a lot of money gets pumped into the economy while the supply of goods is limited, you get more money chasing the same amount of stuff, and prices rise. That's textbook inflation, and the scale of pandemic spending was historically large. The fourth force is the one heating up right now, in 2025 and 2026, tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on goods coming from other countries. Here's the key thing to understand, because it's widely misunderstood. When a tariff is placed on an imported good, it is usually not the foreign country that pays it. The importer, a domestic company, pays the tax, and then passes that cost straight on to the shopper through higher prices. Coffee, tomatoes, toys, sporting goods, furniture, clothing, all have been hit. The coffee price spike mentioned earlier was directly tied to a 50% tariff on a major coffee exporter. Some economists warn that if tariffs keep expanding, they could push inflation back up toward 4 or 5%, undoing some of the recent cooling. So the short version is this. Prices exploded between 2020 and 2023 because of broken supply chains, an energy shock, and heavy government spending. Now, in 2025 and into 2026, prices are rising more slowly, but they're sitting at a far higher level than before the pandemic. And tariffs threaten to give them another shove upward just as people were starting to catch their breath. Here's something that doesn't get said enough, and it's important. This has hurt some people far more than others, and not by accident. Lower and middle-income families spend most of their money on necessities. Housing, food, transportation, childcare. When those get expensive, the budget gets crushed with nowhere to hide, because there's no luxury spending to cut. Wealthier people buy those same things, but they make up a much smaller slice of their income, so there's plenty left over. When prices rise, the wealthy barely feel it while everyone else feels it constantly, with every purchase. There's a number that captures this. Housing costs for a couple with 3 children rose about 134% between 2001 and 2024 by one careful measure. For a high-income family, a housing increase like that is an annoyance. For a family already stretched thin, it's the difference between making it and not making it. That's exactly why the cost of living has become such a charged political issue everywhere. The pain is real, and it's deeply unequal. A family making $30,000 a year that suddenly faces $500 more in rent is in crisis. A family making $300,000 barely notices the same increase. And because politicians on all sides know how raw this nerve is, affordability has become one of the most fought-over topics in public life, with each side blaming the other and claiming credit for any good news. It's worth being a little skeptical of anyone, in any party, who claims they single-handedly fixed or broke something as massive and global as the cost of living. These forces are bigger than any one leader. There's also that hidden problem with the official numbers themselves, worth returning to. Over the long run, the official inflation measure has risen far less than the true cost of the things families actually depend on. The official basket includes things like electronics and televisions, which have genuinely gotten cheaper and better over time, and that drags the average down. But it doesn't weigh housing, healthcare, and childcare as heavily as real families experience them. So when the headline says, inflation is 2.5%, the lived reality for a typical household, especially one with kids, is often meaningfully worse than that comforting number suggests. So what comes next? It depends on forces nobody fully controls. Global supply chains. Energy markets. Tariff decisions. Central bank policy. But a few things look reasonably likely. The worst of the inflation is probably behind us. A return to 9% seems unlikely without some major new shock. But a return to the calm, forgettable 2% of the past also seems unlikely in the near term. The new normal is probably somewhere around 3 to 4% a year. The biggest wild card is tariffs. If they expand aggressively, prices could jump again. If they hold steady or come down, inflation likely stays moderate. Either way, the high prices already baked in are not coming back down. That ship has sailed. Now the part that actually helps, what to do about all of this. Because while the big forces are out of any one person's hands, there are real, concrete moves that make a genuine difference. Start by understanding exactly where the money goes. This sounds basic, but most people have never actually mapped it out. Look hard at the budget for 1 month. For most people the biggest line is housing. For parents it might be childcare. Once the big expenses are staring back at you in black and white, smart decisions get a lot easier, because you can see where the real money is, instead of obsessing over small stuff. Where possible, lock in prices on the big things. If inflation looks likely to rise, locking in a rent agreement or a fixed mortgage rate provides real protection against future increases. Anyone considering refinancing might prefer to act while rates are relatively stable rather than gambling on the future. Most everyday costs can't be locked in, but the big fixed ones, the ones that dominate the budget, often can, and those are the ones that matter most. Shift spending toward cheaper alternatives where it doesn't hurt your quality of life much. If meat is expensive, lean on cheaper proteins like beans, eggs when they're cheap, or chicken. If restaurants are draining the budget, cook more at home, where the same food costs a fraction. If specialty coffee out is the culprit, brew it at home for pennies a cup. These sound small individually, but they stack up fast. Cutting $100 a month is $1,200 a year, and cutting $300 is a serious sum over time. But here's the single most important move, and it gets overlooked constantly because it's the hardest. Focus relentlessly on growing your income faster than prices rise. The deepest problem isn't really that things are expensive. Wealthy people buy expensive things all the time without stress. The problem is income failing to keep up. A 2% raise against 3% inflation is actually a pay cut in disguise, even though the number on the paycheck went up. So push for raises. Hunt for better paying roles, since changing jobs is often the fastest way to a real pay bump. Build skills that employers pay a premium for. Income growing at 4 or 5% a year actually beats inflation, and that's where real breathing room comes from. Cutting costs has a floor, you can only cut so much, but growing income has no ceiling. Here's a trap to watch for as your income grows, though, because it quietly undoes all that hard work. It's called lifestyle creep. The moment people earn more, they tend to spend more, almost automatically. The raise comes in, and suddenly the apartment gets nicer, the car gets newer, the subscriptions multiply, the dinners out get fancier. Within a few months, the higher income feels just as tight as the lower one did, because spending rose to swallow it whole. This is one of the main reasons people earning good money still feel broke and still live paycheck to paycheck. The fix isn't to never enjoy your money. It's to make sure that when income rises, spending rises slower, so the gap between the two actually widens over time. That growing gap is what builds real security. Letting lifestyle creep eat every raise is how someone can double their salary over a decade and somehow feel no richer at all. Be smart about debt, because inflation changes the math on it. In an inflationary world, fixed-rate debt can quietly work in a borrower's favor, because the loan gets paid back later with money that's worth less than when it was borrowed. A 30-year fixed mortgage is the classic example. Variable-rate debt is the danger, though. A credit card at high interest, or any loan with a rate that floats up and down, can get painful fast if inflation heats up and rates rise with it. Those high-interest, variable balances are the ones to attack and eliminate first. And don't let savings rot as cash. This is a quiet, costly mistake millions of people make. Money sitting idle in a basic checking account loses real value every single year that prices rise, even though the dollar amount never drops. Historically, things like a broad basket of stocks and real estate have kept pace with or beaten inflation over the long run. Keeping some cash for emergencies is essential and smart. But hoarding all of your money as cash during an inflationary period is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes there is. There's a bigger picture too, beyond personal choices. Governments can't ignore this forever, because when the basics, especially housing and childcare, climb out of reach for ordinary working people, it destabilizes everything, economically and politically. Some places are responding by trying to build far more housing, since the most reliable cure for high housing prices is simply more housing. Some are experimenting with childcare subsidies. Some are working to strengthen and shorten supply chains so they're less fragile next time. These are slow, multi-year, often politically contentious fixes. But they're the kind of structural change that actually moves the needle, as opposed to quick gimmicks that make headlines but change little. So here's where it all lands. Why is everything so expensive? Because prices exploded between 2020 and 2023 thanks to broken supply chains, an energy shock, and heavy government spending. Inflation has since cooled, which is genuinely good news, but prices are stuck at